Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. This video is for Singaporeans and Singaporeans only. I know we get a lot of hate from the rest of Southeast Asia, but if you're elsewhere in the world and want to see how an average Singaporean lives, stick around. Today, I'm sharing how much money you should aim to save at every age, at least for Singaporeans. As someone who studied and worked in finance for years, I know that tracking your financial progress is key. So let's dive in and see how you measure up to the average Singaporean. First off, in your 20s. In 2025, Singapore's average net worth was $517,000, but the median for all Singaporeans is actually closer to $135,000, per the UBS Global Wealth Report. For 20-somethings, it's likely closer to $10,000 to $20,000. That's because at that age, you tend to have more modest savings and CPF. Why is there this gap, right? 6.7% of adults in Singapore are actually millionaires, but this can be attributed to the high HDB values and it's all in asset prices, not really in their liquid savings. So this skews the average, while the median actually reflects most people. So if you're below that, of course, don't worry. It could also be for a multitude of reasons. You could be younger than the average age in Singapore, which is pretty high because we have an aging population and a high dependency ratio. But if that's the case, you need to focus on building a strong foundation. First off, start by calculating your net worth. It's a very simple accounting equation that we call the current ratio, where it is asset equals to liabilities plus equity. So in terms of your asset, you want to add up everything you own, like cash, CPF, cars, watches, or if you have some gold bars lying around, those are assets. In terms of liabilities, you want to subtract debts like your student loans or your credit card loans. And your next step would be to build an emergency fund. You keep working towards this. For someone in your 20s like myself, you should aim for 3 months worth of your income. So let's say if you earn $3,000 a month, which is slightly above the average 2.7k median for 20 to 24-year-olds, that's $9,000 you need to save in your bank account. A high-yield savings account like DBS Multiply can also help because that helps you to compound your interest over time and get some kind of fixed income from your savings. Another thing you need to note is to live below your means. There's this very famous rule that goes around called the 50-30-20 rule. 50% for essentials like rent, 20% for wants like dining out, watching a movie, and 20% for savings and investments like your CPF top-ups or your investments into, equity indices, right? So that's your goal in your 20s. In your 30s, however, you got to think a little bit differently. Aim to save about 1 times your salary. Say $75,000 if you earn $75,000 a year. So that's like saving your whole annual salary. But you have 10 years to do that because you have 10 years in your 30s, right? So the median for 35 to 39-year-olds are actually $6,300 a month, and a lot of it is due to CPF and HDB ownership. At this age, 89.3% of Singaporeans actually own a home, be it from your BTO or HDB or private resale. This helps to boost net worth because you get the capital appreciation that comes with asset inflation in Singapore. Property tends to always go up because we are land constrained, but you got to make sure that you also have liquid savings. Like I mentioned, the emergency fund is still key, but you also want to shift towards a more longer term approach with investing. So when you're looking at indices or index funds, which historically pay 6 to 8% per year, you want to make sure that you're putting a portion of your income into that. Like I said, 20%, and maybe pay off all your high interest debt. This is actually very important because this is what really will eat into your liabilities, right? So credit cards with rates above 7%, a lot of credit cards charge you 20 to 30% on interest, and you got to make sure you pay this off because it's a lot of outgoing. Another thing to consider is that you need to think about bringing in more income. That's another way. You don't really have to cut costs, like guy math, you got to actually start to think about making more. So that can be passive income streams, passive cash flow streams. Another thing you could do is also drop hop every 2 years. I'm not recommending it, but normally you could get your salary to peak at about $7,000 to $8,000 a month by your late 30s. And this normally aligns with your career path. In your 40s, aim for 3 times your annual income. That means $225,000 if you're earning $75K. With CPF and property, some hit $500,000 in net worth. But like I said, liquid savings are also what's most important. So you're closer to the average Singaporean at this point because if you have $500,000 in net worth, and the average is 517,000 like I mentioned earlier, this is also closer to the average age of Singaporeans. So know your retirement magic number at this stage. Because if your annual expenses when you retire are 40,000, you will need $1 million after 65 years old when you retire. What you should do is break your savings into achievable milestones, like your first 50K, then your next 100,000. And they always say your first $100,000 is the hardest to make. And after that, compound interest kicks in, allows you to grow your wealth faster. You are allowed to do different strategies in terms of your asset portfolio, and it helps. So now that you're in your 50s, by this point, you should be aiming for 6 times your salary because you had like 30 years of working life to do that. You will be thinking about having about 450,000 to 600,000 in your savings account, and CPF and property of course helps. At this point, you still kind of want to diversify your investments across ETFs, but you also need to balance it in terms of putting more into the risk-free portion, in terms of your REITs and bonds and your fixed income, your dividend portfolio, because you don't want so much heavily skewed towards risky assets at this age because you don't have the same timeline for these kind of assets to appreciate over time. Another key thing you need to do is also think about topping up your CPF for tax relief, and 4 to 6% interest. That really helps to boost your compounding. So now in your 60s, right, you gotta aim for about 8 times your annual income. That is $600,000 to $800,000. Getting closer to your magic retirement number, you need about $1 million to retire in Singapore if you're thinking about $40,000 a year in expenses. That's only about 3 to 4K per month, which is pretty reasonable at that age because you might have a lot of dependents relying on you, you have medical bills that are piling up. So the key here is to focus on preserving wealth. Like I said, similar to your 50s, you need to put more into your risk-free assets, but your allocation here actually changes because you actually want to diversify more into bonds and low-risk T-bills to protect against the market swings. Like if you're in your 60s, you probably don't want to be heavily invested in the US equities market right now with the Trump administration bringing in so much volatility, with his new tariffs, with his new trade wars going on. A normal person don't have, like at that age, doesn't have the time frame to wait those out. So there you have it. These benchmarks can guide your financial journey at every stage. If you're behind, don't really think about it too much because it's really never too late to start as long as you start making a plan and sticking to it. That helps you get to your financial freedom, your financial independence, retire early, your FIRE strategy. So to sum things up, I just want to say that your asset allocation should shift. In your 20s, it's more like 80 to 90% stocks. But towards your 60s, you want to have like 20 to 30% in your risky asset, which is your stocks, and more towards your risk-free T-bills, your dividends as you grow older, reducing this risk as you near retirement. So another question that guys might ask is that why is the average $570,000 so far from the median, right? It's really strictly due to this HDB assets that most of us get to own. It is basically your nest egg or your birthright as a Singaporean, because buying into it early would help you to gain in that capital appreciation. And while most of us are asset rich and cash poor, eventually you are able to sell this after your MOP and you could probably make a tidy sum. So if you found this video helpful, give it a like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment below on what you think about this video and how you're tracking your savings goal. And until next time, see you. Bye.